What's up guys, with the release of the new raid season comes a multitude of new bosses. In this video, I'll briefly talk about each boss, as well as provide some general tips and information regarding the changes in the new season. Let's get started. The first raid boss in the week is none other than Dark Lord. Back in season 2, late game players found that the best strategy for this boss was bursting as much damage as they could within the first 60 seconds, since this was the time at which Dark Lord would start using her breaths. This strategy has pretty much been nerfed with the changes in the new season. Long story short, the developers modified the damage system such that it would render most bursting strategies to be ineffective. In addition to this, they've made it so that Dark Lord now starts her ultimate attack at 30 seconds as opposed to 60 seconds. Because of this, we've now gone back to a more traditional type of team with a healer, buffer, and main DPS rather than a bursting team that was nothing but DPS. For players who happen to have Darkness, I'd recommend using Yui, Dark Lord, Irie, and Darkness. Keep in mind Dark Lord and Irie are both interchangeable with other supports such as Rachel and Aqua. Dark Lord and Aqua both provide attack buffs which would help Yui's heal, whereas Irie and Rachel would provide more defensive buffs to the team. If you don't have Darkness, then I would recommend a lineup such as Yui, Dark Lord, Rachel, and Irie. Next up is Beezlebub. This boss acts very similarly to the mermaid boss from the previous season. Its attacks can hit your entire team, but using characters such as Darkness and Vivian who reduce the enemy's missile penetration can reduce its number of attacks toward your team, resulting in a protected backline. If you have a Darkness, then I would recommend using her along with Yui, Aina, and Vivian. Aina is there because her passive skill can reduce the enemy's fire damage. Vivian and Darkness both serve the tank and reduce the enemy's number of attacks. If you don't have Aina, Vivian, or Darkness, then you can replace any of them with characters such as Irie, Aqua, and Theseus. Irie and Theseus would both do a decent amount of damage, whereas Aqua would just be a second healer. I have found most combinations to yield similar results. Next up is the new water raid boss Ariel. This boss is pretty straightforward. She inflicts physical damages that can only reach your front 4 characters, which means your healer should be in the very back where they can be safe. The only thing to note would be that the boss performs her own ultimate attack once you reach 15 billion damage, and she will perform it again in increments of 2 billion, so you'll see it again at 17 billion, 19 billion, and so on. This ultimate of hers does about 5 lines of damage to your entire team and cannot be cancelled with your regular skills. The only way you can cancel it is with a stun. If your team is able to get to 15 billion, then in order to continue onward, you will either need to stun the boss when she's charging up her attack, or have a team tanky enough to withstand the attack. For this boss, I would use Yui and Kain along with 3 team buffers. Great buffers would be Irie, Dark Lord, Aqua, Rachel, and Odin to name a few. Next up, we have an old boss, which is the infamous Leaf Dragon. I didn't really notice any differences with this boss compared to how it was in the previous season. I kept my team composition the same, which consisted of Yui, Irie, Dark Lord, and Darkness. Irie and Dark Lord are interchangeable with Aqua, Odin, and Rachel in case you didn't have any of those characters. If you don't have Darkness, then I would just replace that slot with a team buffer or DPS such as Kana. Following the Leaf Dragon is the light elemental boss Zeus. All he does is shoot lightning beams out of his hands which hit your entire team. If you have Darkness, then she would be a good asset to use if you have yet to reach 15 billion damage. Otherwise, if you're capable of passing 15 billion damage, then I would replace Darkness out with another team buffer as she would provide little team benefit after 15 billion damage. Since the boss is light, I'd recommend using Joan and Irie as they both reduce the damage taken by light enemies. For the third buffer, I would recommend anyone that provides team attack, defense, or HP such as Dark Lord and Rachel respectively. For Friday's raid, we had the new boss Balrog, who functions similarly to Belphegor from the previous raid season. If you're able to have a warrior such as Vivian or Darkness positioned in front of Kain, then you can run into a scenario in which the 2 people in your backline can be entirely safe from harm. In this case, I was able to have Darkness positioned in front of Kain, which provided enough distance for both my Yui and Megumin to be entirely safe. The last slot can then go to any team buffer. If you don't have Darkness, then I would recommend getting 3 team buffers with Yui in the back and Kain as the main DPS. One last thing to note about Balrog, which is that according to the official Discord, this boss along with the next boss that I'll be talking about will have their elemental types change from week to week, so there's that. Saturday's raid boss is Chaos, which looks similar to Balrog. This is another hard-hitting breath boss similar to Dark Lord and the Dragons, and thus will have a similar team composition to those bosses that I've already mentioned. On weeks where its elemental type is fire or light, you may want to use Aina, Joan, and Ariel to reduce its elemental damage. Otherwise, it's pretty much just getting 3 team buffers and having Kain and Yui do most of the work. Now, that is all the new raid bosses for the new raid season. So, what are my overall thoughts of the new season? Overall, I think that this was a good update. Obviously, some raids were made much easier, whereas some were made much more difficult. I'm just happy the developers were finally able to give us some new boss types. Now, I didn't want to make the video too long, so there may be some things that I might have missed or got incorrect depending on the various patches. If you guys had any further questions about the bosses, team compositions, or my gear, feel free to ask them below. I'll be working on a video where I go through all my gear, but just know that that content will be fairly subjective and everyone has different ideas when it comes to what item sets to use. Thanks again for watching everyone, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.